What's going on, my fellow Raiders, Doomers, Crusaders, Scullies, and Fivers? It's me, Russell. I run the Rusty Roll-Ups YouTube channel, and today we're going to be doing a whip cracking breakdown. So I'm going to be going over a whip routine that I just sort of came up with on a fly when somebody was recording me at one of our California Jones events, and I'm just going to call it the Rusty Flash. It's inspired by the Cairo Flash and a bunch of the other Indiana Jones whip cracks. So I'm going to shut up now and get into the routine and break it down for you guys. So this is what the Rusty Flash looks like, and I'm going to be using an 8-foot economy Indy made by Sword Guy Builds. Alrighty everyone, so we're going to be going over step 1, which is going to be the Cairo Crack. So this is the classic whip crack scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark where Indy defends Marion from the bandits in Cairo. And basically what I'm doing is I'm using an underhand crack, going into the Cairo Flash, and then finishing up with sort of a sidearm flick. Notice how the first underhand crack is very smooth and very fast. I'm using a sort of scooping motion, sort of like how you would throw a tennis ball upwards for that first crack, and then I'm smoothly transitioning into the Cairo Crack, which is basically a cattleman's crack, but instead of finishing down at my side, I'm throwing it forward and reeling it back over my head. Also notice how the whip falls right behind me in a straight line. And notice when I go back out for the final sidearm crack, I'm not recoiling. It may look like that, but really what I'm doing is casting my arm out in another scooping motion directly in front of me again, and pulling back over my head once the crack has finished. So let's go over the Cairo Crack one more time in full speed. Moving on to step 2, we're going to be doing the very basic cattleman's crack. This is the most basic whip crack that most people learn when they're first trying to crack a whip. It's a simple up-down motion where I'm lifting my arm up, waiting for a curve in the whip, and then throwing it out once it passes my head. Notice how I lift up and I wait a little bit. And you'll know when to throw the whip out because you'll feel a small tug back on your arm on the lift up. And you can see that the curve is forming. And just as that arc forms behind you, you're going to throw the whip out in a straight line. And that will produce the crack. Whilst the footage is in slow-mo, I'm not waiting a terribly long time when the arc is behind me. I'm just waiting just enough for maybe a split second, and then I'm going for the crack. You can see what happens when I don't let the whip get all the way behind me and I throw it out way too early. And by snapping it down like a towel, it's bringing the wave of the whip back towards you, which could come back and injure you, and then that's not going to be very fun. With all of that out of the way, let's see the cattleman's crack one more time at full speed so you can really see the flow and the straightness of the whip. The next part of the routine is called the slow figure 8. This crack is going to start with an underhand crack just like at the beginning of the routine, but we are throwing in a little bit of figure 8 action. So notice how I'm starting with the underhand, and I'm going into a cattleman's and transitioning into a reverse cattleman's crack. Don't worry, I know that sounded really freaking confusing, but I'm going to try to break it down the best I can. So just like with the start of the Cairo Crack, I'm starting with an underhand and then I'm finishing with the cattleman's crack like I showed you before. So keep practicing those first 2 cracks, and notice something very specific that I do when I finish my cattleman's crack. You notice that I'm bringing the wave of the whip behind me. I'm dragging my arm back and upward so the whip makes another loop I know, it sounds really confusing, and trust me, I'm even really confused here myself. You notice how when I go for that second crack, the whip comes back in front of my face, and I'm not dragging it back towards my face. It's a matter of bending my arm downward past my hip, which is gonna get me the crack. I know I'm not really explaining it the best. I wish I could do it better, so I'm gonna shut up and let the footage do the talking for me. Okay, I hope that footage explained it a lot better than I did. Let's take a look at that crack in full speed before we move on to our next move. Well, if you haven't clicked off the video by now or died of confusion, we finally made it to step 4, the final flourish. We're about to combine 4 different cracks here, so I hope you've been paying attention up to this point. Take a breather for a second. I know that was a lot. Alright, are you ready? Let's do it. We're starting with a fast figure 8. Then we're going back into that Cairo flash, swinging around our head one more time into one last overhead crack. Remember how we reversed directions on the slow figure 8. With the fast figure 8, all we're doing is this. Once we finish that first Cattleman's crack, we're going to snap our wrist back to get the next crack. It's almost like how we brought our wrist downward past our hip for the slow figure 8. Watch my wrist movement closely so you can see what I mean. So also notice how when I finished the fast figure 8, I went immediately into the Cairo crack. Then once I finished the Cairo crack, I went immediately into the overhead crack. And pay attention to my arm movements when I'm swinging the whip around for that final overhead crack. If this routine is confusing to you, and I mean the entire thing, that's completely fine and I understand. The most important thing to do right now is to practice each crack consistently so you get a better understanding of the whip's movement. Other than that, thank you for watching this video. I'm going to show you guys the entire routine, the Rusty Flash, in full one more time.